How do you do? My name is Lane Rasberry. I'm here with Erin Robinson of Metadata Game Changers. I'm at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. Erin and I are both interested in data modeling, open science research practices, and accessibility to information. So a few levels of abstraction. This video is for anyone who's interested generally in the state of contemporary science and what's hot right now. What's hot right now is giving every scientist access to the totality of all available information. And if you're not a scientist, it might surprise you about how much investment there is in universities and industry, citizen science everywhere, in producing research which other people who are researching the same thing might not even know exists. It's very difficult to go to a research institution, push a button, and find a list of all the research they have ever published. So levels of abstraction here. Just imagine that a person produces research and a person might be at an institution. Multiple people might be at that institution, and you want all the research out of an institution. Also, institutions have sub-organizations, and that's particularly what we're going to be talking about today. Supposing there's an organization, they have a field research site. They're not doing research at the university. They've got they leave the university, go out into the environment in the world, and do research somewhere else. How do you get the research associated with a field research site? Erin, can you say something about this challenge and how it came up in your own research?
Yeah, so thanks, Lane, and hi, everybody. So this came up because I'm working with two field stations in French Polynesia, the UC Berkeley Gump South Pacific Research Station, and a smaller, newer field station called the Tetiaroa Eco Station. And what the field stations were finding was that people were coming to the station, they were doing a lot of work, and then they were leaving with their data, and it was really hard to find the outcomes, papers, data sets, et cetera, that had been published from that work. And that made it hard for them to show how valuable they were as this resource adjacent to these interesting and highly studied environments. And also made it challenging for the community to benefit from the research that was happening from these folks. And then it made it hard for, like Lane was saying, for other researchers who were studying the same area to know what was going on in that area. And so there was redundant work, or made it hard for new folks to get into this particular area because they didn't know what was being studied.
Can you say why are people leaving with their data? Do they not want to share it? Is this highly confidential? Is this some kind of like oversight? What's happening here?
Yeah, so I think that when people go to the field, so what we're talking about is ecologists and biologists primarily were the initial groups that do this, but now all kinds of researchers use biological field stations, but they're going and they're visiting. And so they're going for a week to a couple of months, but they're intensely working, collecting samples or studying, like fish occurrence data is another, like, or bird occurrence, bird watchers, all sorts of environmental observations. They're working super hard while they're there, but they don't live there. And so this is a key place for them to collect data, but this is just the first step in the data journey from the collection to actually publishing something that would, be considered, scientific knowledge. So there's this big sort of gap in the middle, which often is a long time. It's months to years. Sometimes they have to go back year after year to build this data set before they have enough data to publish. So it's not malicious at all. It's just that it's a long process, and ecologists haven't had standardized tools or ways of collecting data in shareable formats like other scientific domains, like astronomy, for instance, with large instruments like telescopes. It's very easy, or it's not very easy, but it's easier for them to share data because it's all coming from the same instrument. Ecologists have a diversity of instruments, including themselves, to collect data.
All right, so to recap, and you tell me if I'm correct. So you have multiple researchers, perhaps from multiple institutions over a period of years, and they're all leaving their home institutions and going out into the field, some location, perhaps in the natural environment, and they're doing research at a particular location. These researchers may not be in the same project. There could be multiple projects happening here. So perhaps they're sharing with their team, but they're not sharing across teams. They would if asked, but we're talking about a natural location in the forest. It's not like there's a library that you can deposit your data at.
Right.
And they just don't have library cataloging services set up to share things. In comparison to like astronomers, they all go to the same telescope and some common logging infrastructure to say who was there and when. But in field stations, we don't have this in place, and people might even be producing data that would be interest to the others, but just don't have a mechanism in place to share. Did I miss anything?
That I think the only thing I would add is that that's exactly right, and then that they are often not there at the same time. So researchers, even like researchers that are coming from, let's say you and I are both coming from University of Virginia, we may be going in different seasons. We may be going even just like miss each other by a week, but we're the the field station can only hold so many people. So it's likely that there are a lot of researchers that work at the same station, but that never meet because their trips don't overlap.
A challenge in logistics. Okay,
Yep.
and you tell me what you did to help address this challenge, and then what are some applications and things that can come from this?
Yeah. So the first thing that we did was we looked at how do we identify field stations. And so it's interesting that there's no um, complete count of field stations because they're coming and going. Many field stations have been around for decades to over 100 years, but field stations also are coming and going, and the definition of what a field station is or a research site is are also um, can expand and contract depending on sort of exactly what you mean. And so we looked at the different ways that field stations were described by field station organizations and also in Wikidata. And so that was the first thing to see, like, what were the kind of key concepts describing field stations. And then the next step was what are the identifiers that we can link to these field stations so that we can then attach other information about them. So maybe I'll stop there because that's a lot.
Okay, just so reflecting, you were looking for the ways in which people describe field stations, and what is the name of it, where it is, and whatever other kinds of data points you want to put in your description. And just because you have that, there's also not an obvious place to register this in a catalog. So you had to
Yep.
make a choice about where to register this. What libraries register books. There's not any particular library catalog that's set up to register field stations. You had to come up with that.
Yeah, and I
Am I
think,
with you?
yeah,
Okay.
maybe you're with me. Yeah, and I think one thing that we saw was that organically people had been adding field stations to Wikidata. And so I can show just a quick screenshot of this. Um, so um, so here we see that this is the page for Antarctic research stations. And what we know is that there are many, many Antarctic research stations hosted by many countries. And so this was a page for Antarctic research stations generally. And when we look at the what links here, then we see that there are all of these specific stations that are linking to being an instance of an Antarctic research station. So this is something that we can see, and I'll just pick one that I know, which is McMurdo. This is the US station. And so we see now that we're getting this metadata about the McMurdo station. It's also known as other languages, images, etc. So this is one way that we could link then downstream activities back to the McMurdo station. I'll stop sharing here.
Okay. Can you say what activities would you link to this station? Like what kinds of things would a person even want to link to if they knew what a station was?
Yeah. What we know is that field stations control access to specific areas. So McMurdo, for instance, is controlling access to researchers that are wanting to do research in Antarctica. And they do that through a project application process. And so basically field stations are oriented around researcher projects. And so that's the first thing that we would want to attach to the field station and make public. So we know that field stations all have processes. Some of them are as simple as email, and then some of them use systems, and have their own systems for collecting these applications, sometimes reviewing the applications, but they often don't publish the applications. And so this gets to your initial early point that we want researchers to be publishing much earlier in the life cycle of their project than at the very end when they say, here's the scientific paper that we took 4 or 5 years to create. So this is an example of moving that publication up to when they're planning to do research at the project application stage.
Erin, I'm a big enthusiast of open science. I know you are as well. To me, that's what you're describing. For people who might be unfamiliar with the concept, can you briefly say why would people want to register? Why would people want to share? Why would people want to publish earlier? What does any of this mean to non-scientists?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that we need to be able to trace the ethical collection of data back to the place. And so by publishing early, then what we're doing is we're providing these instances where we can then trace the journey of, the researcher had permission, had the appropriate permits, had the appropriate consent from local Indigenous communities. And we are attaching all of that to this project application as well, this project metadata that we publish. And then the samples and the other kinds of data streams that are coming out of those projects then are attached. They can link to the project metadata. And then when a researcher is finally ready to publish, they publish and they link to these data sets. And the data sets have all of this ethical, legal, social metadata that provides the trace from, the original places where they conducted research to these final outputs. So it's both, I think it's for ethical reasons. And it's also for, there's a lot of mis and disinformation out in the world, and this kind of tracing then allows for, the confirmation or like a digital fingerprint, if you will, of the data is being, this is where we can say that this is where it comes from, or this is sort of the, I don't know, the like vouching for the fact that like the researcher did come and collect data where they said they did.
I totally get it. So credit to everyone who contributed to the project, even people who
Yep.
haven't conventionally received credit in previous generations of science. Very specific attribution for what someone contributed to the project. Records of all the review, whether that's legal review or ethical review or any other kind of review that happened here. Chain of communication with community partners who might be outside the research infrastructure, but who are stakeholders in the area or in the research outcomes. Streams of data for people to share, open data, good for scientists to collaborate with each other. A basis on which to found other conversations. Should there be community questions about it, or people want to ask what's happening, this is your public media record where all these things can happen. Very, very happy to hear about any of this. Is there anything else you can show to explain generally about what's happening or what this looks like in practice?
Yeah. So I'll show one other. This is an example of work that we've been doing with the GUMP South Pacific Research Station. And so another, so Wikidata is one kind of identifier that we can use. There's another research organization registry that also provides identifiers. And so GUMP has one of these research organization registry IDs or RORs. And one of the things, so here we can see that we have been publishing these projects like I was just describing. So you can see some of those project publications. We're just getting started here. And so this gives the field station this kind of dashboard look of like, who are the people? What are the kinds of things they're publishing? How much are they publishing over time? And I specifically want to look at one record. So we've been doing some work retrospectively because all of these ideas that I've been talking about are new. And so one way to try them out has been to go back to past projects. And so this Maria Biocode 1.0 project was a project that was done in 2007 to 2010. And so here you can see that now when we publish this project early, we give it a citation. All of the creators are attached to the project with their affiliations. So the credit that we were talking about is here. The field station is listed as a contributor. The funder that funded this work, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, is also attached. And then because this is a retrospective project, we can also see the related works that are produced by the project. So we call these the parts. So these are the parts of the project. And you can see when we've got all of the identifiers, this is all still very much a work in progress, but we can see the connections to these different outputs. And then we also can show, these are things that cite the project. So often we want to be able to cite the project, like this project was informed by this past project. And so these are examples of things that are citing the project that were not produced by the project. So it's really showing the influence that this project has had. And we can do all of this because we created this project object that we published, and it had the metadata that we talked about, and we connected it back to the field station. And then it was also something that we could connect forward to all of these other activities and start to show kind of these connections between, and visualize these invisible connections that we knew were happening, but now we have a way to show them through the infrastructure.
All right, Erin, what I'm seeing is that previously people were publishing their papers at a research site or at a topic that's researched at that research site. These papers would float around in libraries. There weren't any particular way to interconnect them. So what you've done, you've used an existing registry in a new way. So the registry existed, but you registered a research site, a field station in this registry, and now you've begun to connect publications, data sets, people, funders, the entire research project to this in the registry. And what the registry is, it assigns a persistent identifier. So you have this research station, it goes by a name, but the name could be ambiguous. When you assign an identifier to it, it's no longer ambiguous. Anyone who's searching for it on the internet, either with humans or through a machine, which is increasingly important, machine search, they will definitely find your entry and can find any project that anyone has connected to this. Am I repeating this correctly? Is this what's happening?
That's what's happening.
Okay. Can we close out? Earlier you mentioned care for Indigenous rights. Can you say something about how this comes up in research and the extent to which it matters and why it's important?
Yep. So in 2016, the FAIR principles were published, and FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that was really, we were seeing this proliferation of scientific data. We thought that there was this need for reusing it. And obviously there is, but with that need for reuse also comes these social and ethical questions around how is the data collected? Did they have permission? Did the communities that it was coming from consent? And so in 2020, the global Indigenous data movement created and published the CARE principles, which are kind of, they're seen together with FAIR and CARE, or to complement FAIR. And CARE stands for collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And what we're now seeing, as we've basically been 4 years on, is that the principles really were helping people to say yes or no if they did these things, but it didn't prescribe how or the reasons why you might want to do that. And so I think as we've worked with field stations, we've really kind of understood that actually care comes first, and we want to support researchers in the ethical ecology and sort of new ways of doing research that replace this extractive mode of dropping into a particular place and taking the data and never connecting with the community. And so in addition to bridging with the funders and with the field station itself and the creators of the project, we also are making these connections between the projects and the local community. And so we do that through local context, which is a new platform. It's the first of its kind, which provides this infrastructure to connect researchers and Indigenous communities in the places that they work. And so the researcher provides a notice when they are putting their project application in. This gives the community a time to review that notice and the project details, and to provide guidance and input into, like, well, maybe you're wanting to work in a place that is a sacred site for that community. Now we're able to say up front, this is a sacred site. It's not, we don't want you to work here. Is an example, is kind of an extreme example, but an example of how that sort of two-way dialogue is beginning to happen. And I think that that's actually like what all of this infrastructure that we've talked about today really is providing. It's surfacing and codifying conversations and dialogue that either wasn't happening, like between the community and the researchers because there wasn't a place for it, or it was happening, but it wasn't really connected or documented in ways that others could learn from. And so that's been, I think, a pretty cool thing that we have been piloting here as well.
Erin, I've enjoyed seeing you develop this documented process. I love talking with you about this. For everyone else, if you're looking to get started in these things, you can check out Erin at Metadata Game Changers. If you want a general community to explore these kinds of ideas of science and data modeling, you're always welcome to come to Wikidata, where there's forums and people who will discuss data modeling with you about anything at any time. In particular, in Wikidata, consider checking out the WikiCite project, which is the subset of Wikidata particularly interested in documenting access to research resources. Erin, thanks so much for the chat today, and look forward to progress on this.
Thanks so much, Lane. Thanks, everybody.